So, all right. So I'm going to call this meeting, the Jones LSC Equity Committee meeting on Wednesday, October 27th, 2021 at 6:02 p.m. And Laura, do you mind taking roll call?
Sure, 1 second. So Deborah?
Here.
Dora?
I think Dora mentioned to me privately that she wasn't going to be able to make it today.
Okay, great. Me here. Violetta?
Here.
Roberto?
Present.
Debbie?
Here.
And Raquel?
Here.
And Raquel, can you please give me your last name or spell it for me?
D-O-N.
D-O-N?
That's it.
Oh, got it. Thanks. Okay, did I miss anybody? Because I know.
Michael?
Oh, Michael, sorry. And Michael.
And did we get our student representative, Debbie?
Yeah.
Right. So then moving on to the next item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda. So I make a motion to approve the agenda.
I'll
Do I have a
second.
Okay, Deborah?
Yes.
I'll say yes. Violetta?
Yes.
Roberto?
Yes.
Debbie?
Yeah.
And Raquel?
Yes.
And Michael?
Yes.
Excellent. So moving on to the next item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes. So I make a motion to approve the minutes from last month's meeting.
I'll second.
Deborah?
Yes.
Yes. Violetta?
Yes.
Roberto?
Yes.
Debbie?
Yes.
Raquel?
Yes.
And Michael?
Yes.
Great. Just one correction, Michael, I think not to call you out on the spot here, but I think you were not present at the meeting, last meeting. So you may want to abstain just to reflect that accuracy, unless you reviewed the video.
Okay. No, I didn't. Did you receive my message prior to that meeting that I wasn't able to attend because of a work conflict?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Just want to make sure. Okay. Yeah, I'm fine with abstaining.
Thank you, Michael. All right, and then moving on to the next item on the agenda is that we received some, a few of us received emails from folks that were interested in joining the equity committee. And I just want to give space to allow them to, if they're still interested, that this would be the time that they should share out, and just I would like to give them 1 minute and express their interest in and anything else that they would like to share with the committee. So I know there were a few people, and I think I see Radia Donald Smith.
Yes, hello.
Radia. Hi, Radia.
Hi.
And hopefully, am I pronouncing your name correctly?
Radia.
Radia, my apologies.
That's okay.
Radia, do you want to take a minute just to introduce yourselves to the committee? I'm presuming that you still want to be a member of the committee.
Yes, I'm interested. I wanted to attend tonight and see what it's like. But my my daughter is a senior at Jones, and I have been not as connected with these kinds of activities with the school, but got pulled in with the recent LSC openings, and so I just am interested in helping out and participating and supporting Jones.
Thank you. And then what I'll do is I'm gonna ask all the individuals who expressed interest to introduce themselves. So Gladys, I know you've reached out to me. Would you, the space is yours.
Hi everyone, sorry I'm still at school, so you might hear some background noise. So I'm Gladys, my son is a freshman currently at Jones. I work at a CPS school station through Metropolitan Family Services, and I coordinate out of school time programs. But I do have a background in racial equity, diversity and inclusion. I have a bachelor's in Latin American Latino Studies. I'm currently the chair for Metropolitan Family Services for the Racial Equity, Inclusion, and Justice Committee for the Midway area.
Thank you, Gladys. And then do we have, is Melanie with us? She joined our meeting. I know she reached out to, I believe she reached out to Deborah.
Yeah, she
We will
did.
come-
I think, and Laura sent her an invitation to tonight, so she knew when the meeting was going to be.
Okay. All right, and then moving on to, I think, Miss Olivia Guerrero. So would you like, I know you've expressed interest in the past, and I'm so happy to see you here with us. Would you like to take a minute to introduce yourself? And if you're still interested in joining the committee.
Yeah, thank you. So my name is Olivia Guerrero. I am an English teacher at Jones. This will be my 6th year at Jones. I graduated from Jones, figuring out a way to like improve Jones is always like super important to me, both like thinking back to my former experience as a student and looking at my experience there as a teacher now. So yeah.
Welcome, Ms. Guerrero. Is there anyone else that's on this Zoom call that is interested in joining as a member? Now, you don't have to join as a member. Our meetings are open to the public, and you can join as a non-voting member. Our rules are a little bit flexible than the whole school, local school council. Hearing no other individuals at this point and seeing no hands raised. So I would like to, I have a Shannon.
Hi.
Shannon Rode. Hi, Shannon. Would you like to introduce yourself? You might be on mute. Shannon, can you hear me? If you can't, give me a thumbs up on the Zoom.
Hold on.
Or...
Hold on. Can you hear
there
me?
You are, Shannon.
Yeah. Sorry. I was saying I'm having some troubles here with the computer. I don't know if you heard that. I have a student who's currently, or a child who's a sophomore right now at Jones, and I have a son who just graduated from Jones. Let's see. This topic in general is very important to me. I was on the diversity and inclusion committee at our last school for, I don't know, probably like 14 years or something. And I'm trying to think. I was a English teacher. I'm not really sure what all you need to know. I, for a lot of years, wrote recommendations for diversity book, recommendations for the school community that my sons went to. I don't know. I didn't realize there was going to be something like this. So I'm not sure what
Oh, no
exactly you
worries,
need to
Shannon.
know. Okay.
Yeah, no, Shannon, it's whatever you feel comfortable sharing in this space. So we really
Okay.
do appreciate you expressing your interest and being a part of this. So,
Okay, thanks.
yep. So I think that we can go ahead and just nominate the Shannon, Radaya, Gladys onto the committee, and Olivia onto the committee. So I would like to make a sweeping motion and go ahead and nominate Olivia, Shannon, Radaya, and Gladys to the committee, to the equity committee. Do I hear a second?
I will second. Raquel.
Thank you, Raquel.
Okay, Deborah,
Yes.
myself, yes. Violetta,
Yes.
Roberto,
Yes.
Debbie,
Yes.
Raquel,
Yes.
and Michael.
Yes.
All right, so welcome to the Equity Committee. Thank you so much for being involved and being interested in just supporting the school and our students and making this just a more welcoming and inclusive community. So moving on to the next item, and I do want to mention one more thing. So one of the goals of our committee last year when we were formed was to have a student on this committee and to have a teacher on this committee. And I am incredibly grateful for the time and the commitment and the interest that Ms. Olivia Guerrero has expressed, and Debbie Mojeku. And I apologize for pronouncing your name incorrectly, but I really do appreciate that. And it's something that we look for, we wanted to make sure that we had that representation as part of this committee. So thank you. So moving on to what we're going to discuss today is the dress code. Laura, would you like to give a summary of why we're here today and how we got here?
Sure. I think how we got here is an amalgamation of different things, but really stemming from what happened the first week of school, where there were some expectations relayed about dress code and students spoke out about how it made them feel. And then it took a closer look at the dress code policy and found, wasn't very specific. So there were other things that sort of arised from that. And so I know there've been recent events too, but ultimately what our goal on the LSC Equity Committee is really to just take a look at, what the current policy or dress code is at Jones, what it looks like at other schools, and what can we do with that research that we've gathered to make it better. So I think the purpose of, listening and learning today, we have a few speakers. I know Roberto is going to share, but our goal is just to, while you're listening to the speakers and as you've researched and looked through all the materials in the folder from all the other schools' dress code policy, is really looking at what are some trends and patterns that we're noticing? What is something that stood out to you? And what do we want to include in Jones? So as we are, please remember those things. I'm going to take notes at the end in real time to gather everyone's feedback and thoughts so that we can have a concrete next step as to what our goal is to help Jones with the dress code policy. Obviously taking consideration feedback from the entire community. You want to know from students, staff, surrounding parents and community, so that it is it's a comprehensive approach that we all take to make it more equitable.
Thank you, Laura. And I also want to give space to Debbie if she would like to add anything to Laura's summary of why we're here today and how we got here today.
I think Laura kind of summed it up really, really well. I actually don't have anything to add.
Thank you, Debbie. And so Laura mentioned that we have two guest speakers with us today who are going to tell us a little bit about their journey navigating the dress code and the potential harms of a dress code and how it's enforced. So the first guest speaker I'd like to introduce is Dr. Keith Robinson, who's an associate professor for educational services at Evanston Township High School. And my understanding is that, and from what I've read, he is a leader in the district. And he was part of this movement, this very progressive movement in reforming the dress code in Evanston and in the district. He has served as so prior to joining the Evanston Township High School, he served as an assistant principal of operation at Niles North High School in Skokie. He also previously taught English at Evanston Township High School from 2001 to 2005. He holds an ED, a PhD in educational leadership from the National Louis University in Chicago, as well as a master's in art and educational administration and supervision from Roosevelt University in Chicago, and a bachelor's in secondary English from Ball State University. So Dr. Robinson has commitment to social justice, proactive student interventions, and academic and behavioral and social emotional support informs his leadership. And I can tell you that I had a wonderful and just thoughtful conversation with Dr. Robinson earlier this week, and everything that last phrase really does sum it up. And one thing that stuck with me after our conversation is that when they were looking at the dress code, that this is becoming an adult problem. It's not a student problem or a children problem, and that we're so concerned, like too often we're concerned on what's on a student's head instead of what's inside their head. And that really resonated. It actually left an impact as I was coming home on the train. So I really do appreciate Dr. Robinson spending time with us. And so I would like to turn yield the floor to Dr. Robinson and welcome him to the Equity Committee meeting.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. 27-year educator. That bio didn't have my service in Chicago. So when I moved to Chicago back in '98, I taught at Lane Tech High School for several years before I went out to Evanston. So I've been steeped in the work for many years. I would say definitely social justice, racial equity does inform my work. It is definitely a passion of mine and has led my work in so many of the different responsibilities, from being a teacher, dean of students, assistant principal, and now associate principal at Evanston Township High School. The teacher in me says, I've got to do this nice presentation that's going to involve a little bit of participation. So I hope that's okay. If I could share my screen, that'd be great. Is that cool? All right, let's see if I can do this on my, let's see.
Cassie might have to give you controls, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think so. Share content. Hosts can only share content in this meeting. If you can provide that access, that'd be great, Cassie.
I think Cassie is working on that right now.
She's got it, yeah. Here we go. I think we're good. All right. I think I'm doing this right. And can you guys see that?
Yes, I see the PowerPoint presentation entitled
Okay,
Let's Talk
good.
Dress Code. Yep.
So I can't see you, but you can see me. So I'll do my best to anticipate your facial expressions, because that is so important, as you know, with this Zoom thing. So real quickly, I'll talk about our process with our dress code. It's always important to understand the why behind our revisions. We'll look at exactly what the ETHS model is. I'll let you know what we're hearing so far, and then we'll talk about next steps. So I always start with the quiz. When was the first dress code law established by the Supreme Court? If I can see you, I would anticipate folks are kind of hovering. So go ahead and think about the answer in your head while I introduce the first research that I got. So I looked back as far as I could and really tried to find or define a district where in a school space, there was an example of a dress code. What did it say? This is the first stuff that I found way back in 1963. Talked about the hemlines, the yardstick test, and I've also, I can even think back of those cartoons, the Little Rascals, where kids, although they dressed a certain way, still had a shirt with slacks, and that was just kind of the standard and the expectation. Going back to the test, if you said B, 1969, that was definitely correct. And you'll probably also remember what case it was. This is the Tinker case back in 69. Just to give you a reminder of this case, so days before the school banned the wearing of the armbands, Tinker was sent home for the violation of this new policy. So the courts ruled so that students had the right to free speech or expression. So this first dress code law was established in 1969 by the US Supreme Court. The case is known as the Tinker versus Des Moines Independent School District, which involved several high school students who wore black armbands to school in a planned protest against the Vietnam War. So in a far-reaching decision, the court essentially decided that schools may limit student expression, such as enforcing a dress code, if there is a legitimate concern that such expression will be disruptive to the learning environment or violate the rights of others. And you'll see that as an emergent theme. This takes me to my earlier days of teaching, 1996 school uniforms. This is about the time, and I can recall clearly, when students were getting killed or jacked for their jackets, their Jordans across the nation. So President Clinton, he instructed the Federal Education Department to distribute manual to the nation's 16,000 school districts, advising them on how they can legally enforce a school uniform policy. So back then, 21 states and the District of Columbia adopted the rules that allow for districts to tell students exactly what to wear. And as you know, even locally in our area, we have schools that enforce a uniform policy. 2011, who could forget zero tolerance? This was crazy. This was around the time that I began to be a high school dean. And I can recall how, insane some of the districts around the nation were suspending kids for all these random, what I think now we would see as very common dress codes. For example, at Duncan High School, they had more than 160 students who were suspended in 1 month. And here are the common offenses: piercings, large belt buckles, untucked shirts, different colored jackets, and other issues. These offenses resulted in a 2-day suspension and loss of privileges. So it was a dramatic dress code that had capri pants, overalls, sweatpants, athletic jerseys, tank tops, tube tops. Students were not to wear low riding jeans, hip hugging pants, or display body piercings. They also couldn't wear hats or hoods or sweatshirts. it was quite the deal. And I also remember right after 2011 is when we in the state of Illinois really started looking at progressive models of restorative justice. That's a whole nother conversation. So this is our why. We've created each year an opportunity for students to have voice in the school. You know, they can talk about the school day. They can talk about issues that they have witnessed and seen in the building. Some that they may not really agree with, but also, you know, we're really trying to uplift the voice of students. And, you know, I put here, they're activists in training. We have a forum called the Wither Bell Forum. It's this hybrid word. Our superintendent's name is Eric Witherspoon, and our principal's name is Marcus Campbell. So Wither Bell. So we provide this forum where students can come in throughout the school day, and there's just Post-it notes and put your paper all over the place and groups, and which are led by student leaders. And we're really trying to teach them to think about and push us to make us as a school community better. Force us to really look at our data. We had to, as a unit of decision makers, agree with a shared philosophy. And of course, we had to do our homework. This is a quick video. It's quick, it's relevant, it's a little funny, but I think you'll enjoy it. And I think it really kind of hits home what this is all about. It should play. Let's see here, maybe I go there. Apologize for the technical difficulties. If I go back.
There's a new threat facing our society. The female body.
All across the country, dress codes igniting controversy.
Ripped jeans and a tank top got her sent home from school.
A 15-year-old girl was forced to change into what her mom calls a shame suit.
But often the fear isn't for the girl's sake, it's for the boys.
The guys, they can't deal with it. Look at the kid. It reminded me of me when I was in high school. I couldn't concentrate because the girls were in these wonderful little cheerleading outfits. How could I do geometry when they were sitting right in front of me? Yeah, I could smell their hair.
That's your problem. The concept is nothing new. Boys will be boys and girls need to conform to keep things under control. But what happens when young women start speaking up? This is Maggie Sunseri. Her school here in Kentucky has a pretty strict dress code. What do we got? Okay, what about this?
See, that's a no-no because collarbone.
Ooh, I like this. This is really pretty.
Shoulders.
I would wear this at a job interview. So Maggie decided to take matters into her own hands.
Last year, I was in a filmmaking class and we were instructed to make short films, but instead I chose to make a controversial documentary because that's just who I am.
I feel really crappy about myself because of this dress code.
One person happened to think it was inappropriate, so I had to miss all of class that day.
The biggest thing is we're trying to teach students how to dress for success.
You got them to change the dress code. What changes were made?
I proposed a dress code where shorts and skirts, instead of going down to your knees, they'd come to fingertip length. And they took that and made it so it was a credit card length.
I think it's 2 1/8 inch is how high above it can be.
That's very specific.
Yeah, and they have that for the collarbone as well.
Their whole thing is they don't want to have teachers have to touch the students to measure it, but they want it to be measurable. So
do they actually use real credit cards?
They talked about having the engineering class making like a stand and like a credit card thing, and then you go stand by it and it will like measure you so they don't have to put their hands on you. I'm here to learn. I'm not here for you to come measure me to make sure I am at the 1/8 of an inch.
Did you keep like a credit card around in your closet so you can measure stuff? This one has to be okay.
Yes, that's perfectly okay, and I wear that a lot during the winter.
Amazing. Dress for success.
Does it feel odd when,
Boys don't get called out in the way that girls do?
We were talking to some of the guys, and they were telling us like they feel kind of insulted, and I think they should feel insulted because really, it's like calling them out, like you can't handle yourselves.
But what if legs and collarbones are actually a distraction for boys? I worked some connections to get a hold of 2 teen boys of my own. Matt and John, both 18, were asked to take 2 separate math tests with me. But for the second test, I decided to add another variable to the equation: my collarbones. My bare collarbones on display, glistening in the light of my office's conference room, how would they be able to resist? How would this distraction affect their academic performance?
Your name on it?
Yep. Good. So, how did this test feel?
I felt decent enough about it.
Did you guys, lose your minds?
No.
Something was different from the first test to the second test, right?
Well, I think the format of the test was a little different.
Right.
Yeah, so.
You didn't see any change?
No.
At all?
No. I didn't really notice anything.
You guys didn't notice that I took off my blazer and revealed my collarbones?
No.
Some people might be super into legs or shoulders or collarbones, but by targeting and restricting girls out of fear that they'll be objectified, we're only objectifying them more.
Why were girls targeted more than boys, and what's unfair about that? Well, I think that girls were targeted just because in our society, our bodies are sexualized at every turn, and so we have to make these rules that, cover up your body or you should be shamed for it. I think what I learned from this experience is that it doesn't matter how old you are, you can still enact positive change, and you shouldn't let adults tell you that you can't.
Are you guys still with me? Okay, beautiful. Thank you. Next, there we go. All right, so I know it was usually I get a chance to have folks kind of check in with each other and just talk about that video that they saw and what came up for them, what was familiar to them, and what was totally crazy. But we can do that at another time. We decided as a part of doing our homework is to really look at the Oregon Now model. So in Oregon, we had, there were some students who went before the board. They were all girls. And they said, hey, listen, we're the ones who are getting dress coded. All the girls, all the guys were not getting dress coded at all. Oregon Now came up with a great dress code. We took that dress code and we tweaked it and localized it to create what we thought was a more concrete, specific code for our school community. This is essentially what they did. The student dress code, what sticks out here, the student dress code and administrative enforcement should not reinforce or increase the marginalization of oppression of any group based on race, gender, ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation, household income, gender identity, or cultural observance. That language is probably familiar too, because we also borrowed that language from Oregon Now. So our framework, we had to come up with some values. The values were that of comfort. Teachers wanted to teach instead of being the clothes police. We didn't want barriers to attendance. We had so many occasions where someone wore something, quote unquote, inappropriate, and the student would be dress coded, which means that they would leave the classroom and lose that time to go to the dean's office and You know, in some districts, they have like the shirt, they talked about the shame shirt. In some districts, you know, they have jackets or, you know, dean's office, that whole notion of shaming students and not keeping them in the classroom. We also wanted to teach self-management, self-regulation for students to let them understand the why behind it. Our goals, we wanted to make sure we continue to have a safe learning environment for students. We also wanted to let students wear that comfortable clothing, express their self-identified gender, wear religious attire without fear, ensure that all students were treated equitably, not equally, equitably. Also prevent offensive images or languages. Essentially, this is our dress code. One more, there it is. Basic principles, we wanted to keep it nice and concise. I can recall standing in front of our main office with our principal, and the policy was written that, you know, it was super subjective. You know, it was based on the interpretation of whoever the person was. So, you know, as it was written, I remember just pointing out students as they stopped by, you know, walk past the office saying that kids, he's violating, she's violating, he's violating. And if we don't have a policy that we can actually enforce or assess, then something's got to give. We actually have to look at the dress code or literally clamp down on the policy as it's written. So we decided to, you know, really critically engage our dress code policy, and this is what we came up with. And we were very intentional about using the explicit words here. So what are they saying? This is a parent quote. Just want to thank you for making education more accessible to girls. Unfair dress codes have been a concern for girls and children of all color for generations, but I saw the article about yours and had to research it. What if I found and made me proud? I wish every school had your common sense approach to attire and learning centers. Well done. Thank you for using good sense in education. Just, you know, we began to just receive a ton of accolades from our community. It got, you know, we gained a lot of attention nationally as well. Just all over the place. We did not anticipate this. Let me be clear. What we were trying to do, what we thought was the right thing to do, was to locally look at our dress code policy, really think about our why in the school community, and come up with something that we thought was the most fair and equitable way for students to participate. We've had states from all over call, like, hey, what are you doing? We love what you're doing. Tell us what you're doing. What's the process? What's the recipe? And, you know, just all over it. And it's just been great to be a support for other districts around the country. We actually went back to our safety team and said, hey, let's do a survey with these guys and see what they're saying. And this is their words. What sticks out to me was one, this bottom right. Last year, I felt like I was on hat patrol. And now I feel like I've missed out on something I should have paid more attention to. And the one to the bottom left, now we're looking for more important things. You know, now our safety team members are building relationships and connections, you know, with students. So we're continuing to look and re-engage and keep to the front what's going on with our students and how it's impacting the culture and climate. And you know, everybody just feels way more relieved. We're continuing to do focus groups and qualitative and quantitative work. We're also you know, sending a lot of messages to our students about body images and body shaming and what that means, and when dress codes has been violated, what actually is a course of actions. But most of all, we're listening to our students and just trusting that they trusting their voice, as a partner in the process. I think this is when I can go back and unshare, maybe. Stop share. There you go. So I know I said a lot. Hopefully it was some food for thought. I'm happy to answer any questions about our process, who was involved, the tons of emails, all the negative stuff, some of the concerns that you all may have. Totally open to listening to what you got to say.
So Dr. Robinson, if I may, hold the questions, ask our committee members to hold the questions. I'd like to introduce our next guest speaker and have her share out. But I really do appreciate the presentation that what you've shared with us and the Evanston Township's journey in trying to make the dress code more equitable and fair, and making sure that it's that we're creating an affirming space. So we'll hold our questions, and then I would like to introduce Rachel Johnson, who is a staff attorney in the Women's and Reproductive Rights Project of the American Civil Liberties Union of Illinois, the ACLU of Illinois. She focuses, my understanding is Rachel focuses on improving gender equality and expanding access to comprehensive reproductive health care for all, which includes ensuring individuals are not denied of information or care due to their providers' views. So Rachel, I do want to give a shout out to Amari Clafetta, who's the director of the Women and Reproductive Rights Project at the ACLU. She put me in contact with Rachel, and Rachel was gracious and very willing to share space tonight and build community and help us understand students' rights and how dress codes could potentially harm or discriminate. So Rachel, I yield the floor to you.
Thank you so much, Roberto. Thank you everyone for having me tonight. It's really wonderful to be here. And it's wonderful to hear from all of you. I just want to sort of begin by saying I'm not completely familiar with the facts of what's going on or the language of the current policy. So I'm not exactly sure how, in what ways I can be most helpful in this situation. But what I can share is what I know about anti-discrimination law and how it's applied to dress code policies in schools, much of which you might already be familiar with. I'm incredibly impressed with all of the thought and care that's already been put into this matter. And in reviewing the ETHS policy and hearing from Dr. Robinson as well, it was just very, sort of heartening to hear all of the incredible work that's happening in creating these inclusive dress codes. That ETHS policy is one of the most comprehensive and inclusive and thoughtful policies I've seen. So it was a real pleasure to read. And I will defer to you as to how I can be most helpful. And I also just want to apologize that I am sort of racing against the clock here until my toddler bursts through the door. So apologies if that happens. In my job, I focus in creating gender equity in schools and places of public accommodation. And what we do know is that dress code discrimination has largely been a matter that is, that is disproportionately affects women of color and women and people of color. And so that is where my role comes in, as I really work on focusing in ensuring that schools are upholding equitable and inclusive policies, as well as not only drafting them and having them, but also applying them and enforcing them in an equitable way, which is what seems to be one of the issues with what's happening at Jones College Prep. So public schools can have a dress code, but state and federal laws say that those dress codes cannot treat people differently or groups of people differently, boys or girls, people of different races or ethnicities. And it cannot also force students to conform to certain sex stereotypes or censor particular viewpoints, as Dr. Robinson so beautifully laid out in his PowerPoint. I'm sorry, I'm just a talking head tonight. I'm not that prepared, but so dress codes cannot be explicitly discriminatory. So while that means that dress codes may specify types of attire that are acceptable, the requirements cannot differ based on students' sex or their race, right? So that's sort of like the obvious baseline. And all students, even if they're transgendered or cisgender, must be allowed to wear clothing consistent with their gender identity and expression. And dress codes, as I mentioned, should not only just be gender neutral on paper, but they must be enforced equally. And while the policy may include neutral language, it may be selectively or disparately enforced or have a disparate impact. And under the law, those are two sort of distinct legal ideas. Dress codes that are targeted at or unevenly enforced against a particular group of students may be violating laws prohibiting race or sex discrimination. And as Dr. Robinson also laid out, rules against appropriate or revealing clothing, such as a ban on tank tops or leggings, shouldn't be enforced or disparately enforced against girls, nor should they be enforced more harshly against certain types of girls, like transgender girls or girls of color. And they frequently are unevenly enforced. And this idea that girls wearing clothing is a distraction to boys in the classroom just is reinforcing stereotypes about how good girls are, how good girls should dress, and it's prioritizing boys' ability to concentrate over girls' comfort and ability to learn. And it is very clear that the law does not allow for that sort of stereotyping. Grooming codes regulating hair length, jewelry, or ear piercing can also raise those same issues. So it's not just about clothes. And then there's the issue of generalized policies, right? Which it seems to me is also a matter here. And when a policy is vague or general, it's left open to subjective interpretation. And when there is subjective interpretation, policy is vulnerable to selective enforcement because individuals are allowed to use their own biases, their deeply rooted biases, to make decisions around what's appropriate and what's not. And that seems to be, the major hook is having policies that are so vague or so general that allows for interpretation, and it allows for these deeply rooted biases that people aren't even conscious of, to sort of control and regulate the student body. And that's the real problem. So schools often try to justify censoring student expression by claiming disruption, or they're worried about what other students or other parents might, think or feel about the certain clothing. But again, courts have consistently ruled that a school's concern about other students' reactions or political message or image does not justify censoring it. So a school's discriminatory enforcement or selective enforcement, or how that policy disparately impacts a certain group, raises concerns under freedom of speech, the First Amendment of the US Constitution, Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment of the US Constitution, Title IX of Education Amendments of 72. So those are all federal or constitutional claims. But there's also state claims that could be, at risk here, such as the Illinois Civil Rights Act and the Illinois Human Rights Act, which prohibit governmental actors from discriminating against an individual or group based on race or sex or sexual orientation or gender. So I'm happy to talk a little bit more about those laws, and what sort of is required to establish a cause of action under those laws. I also am happy to sort of think through what might be helpful next steps, or what sort of evidence or data is helpful in proving these sorts of claims. I sort of defer to you in terms of what might be most helpful.
So, Rachel, thank you so much. I think that overview was incredibly helpful to understand the laws and how and the rights that we have, right, and how dress codes can perpetuate certain harm. And just to give a little bit of background, so Rachel pointed out that as of right now, currently the school dress code for Jones College Prep seems to be vague. And I think that this has been a little bit simmering a few years ago. I think that Dr. Powers had made certain comments about certain attire that might be attributed to our girls and our female students. So like yoga pants or athletic wear and things like that. And so rightfully so, our girl students were raised at. And so it's come back again, it's been surfacing. And just to use a phrase that Malcolm Gladwell uses, it was at the tipping point. And I think Amira mentioned this in email conversation that I had. You know, students were coming back to school, and the first week there were a couple, 2 or 3 announcements, public announcements made about from the administrative leadership, telling students to use common sense and that perhaps certain students were not dressed appropriately and that they should use common sense. And there might have been other phrases, and I think that some of the students just reacted very negatively to that. And I know that a few students were just all of a sudden became a gossip. Who's he talking about? Is it you? Is it me? And I think that is a distraction. And so this is where we're at, and we want to be able to address it because, Rachel, as you mentioned, and Dr. Robinson, as you mentioned, that when the dress code is vague, it can be very subjective, and then enforcement isn't applied equitably or in a fair and just way. And just reading the dress code right here, right, it says students may dress in a manner that is appropriate for a high school setting. I'm not sure what that means, and that's and the other part of that is that an important component of the high school journey is learning to make sound decisions in the context of school and in preparation for life. And it reminded me a little bit about the video that Keith played of preparing them for success. And so it's kind of a play on those words, right? It's just, I find them synonymous. So I think students, or rightfully so, are upset, and they've raised this. And they've raised it with the administration, they've raised it with the local school council, and the local school council has asked us to revise that and take a look at how can we improve this? How can we provide guidance? Not we don't want to restrict, we want to provide guidance and trust that our students will trust our students, just trust our students. So I would like to open up the floor for any questions for either Rachel or Keith, if you have any questions for them. Dr. Robinson or Keith?
Yeah, I have a comment. And thank you, Rachel, for providing some of that context as well, that legal context. It's always a good refresher and for me to remember and recognize and realize that, we're on the right track. One of the things that I would invite the LSC to do is to look at your data. That's one of the first things that we really did to really inform the work. And let me explain what that meant. So we pulled all of our data for dress code violators. What we found, if we isolated race and genderized it, it was for students of girls. They were girls or students who identified as girls of color, Black and brown girls. All right, so those were the far majority of the students who had a dress code violation. The second part that I found to be very intriguing is we have, and most school districts do have in their discipline policy, these subjective buckets that may be called like gross insubordination or something like that. And these are those buckets of behaviors that is subjective in nature, and kind of where that discipline finally lands. Let me give you an example. If we had a student who came to school, a boy who wore a hat or a hood, for example, from the second the kid walks in the door, our safety members and adults who see this kid are saying to the kid, "Hey, young man, you need to take off your hat, take off your hat, take off your hat." So what initially starts as a dress code violation, now that the kid has turned around, they're upset that this adult has been following them and questioning them, may in turn use, cuss them out, for example, or run away or do something else. Now the behavior is not the dress code violation anymore. It's the most egregious act, which is the language or the behavior that's usually raises it to a higher level of behavior. And these are also levels of behavior that a lot of school districts are putting kids in school suspension, detentions, out of school suspension, whatever the case may be. But it started from the hat and now it's ending up out of school. So again, I would invite the LSC to look at your data to see where the gaps are, to tell the real story of who the violators are, who is it impacting, to what percentage and degree they're being impacted.
If I could just, I might be speaking out of turn, but I just want to reiterate that was the next exact thing that I was going to say, is the data will reveal what's happening. But so often that second part that Dr. Robinson is referring to is the other part of the data that is missing. And that's largely what I see in my work, is that students are being disciplined for the fact that they have to stand up for themselves, and that they have to try to defend themselves against the discrimination that they are experiencing day in and day out because of these dress code violations. And it's very hard to collect that data when the disciplinary action is for insubordination, right, rather than a dress code violation. So really trying to sort of follow the threads of why students are being disciplined, and if there is a connection to the dress code, because oftentimes there is. So fact evidence as well as anecdotal evidence is critical. So talking to students about not only who is being disciplined and who is being targeted by the policy, but who is not, right? So who is, has ripped jeans, who has a midriff showing, and who is not being targeted. And that evidence, circumstantial and anecdotal, can be equally as powerful.
And I got to say, once we had our change in dress code policy, those other buckets dramatically decreased.
So Dr. Robinson, there's a couple questions in the chat. I think it's directed to you. So it says, the dress code had a section that said all students must have certain body parts covered. Which body parts? So I know that there's like non-negotiables, right, in your dress code. And then the second part of the question is, and this is from Shannon, wondering about the part that prohibits clothing, which is hostile or threatening, and how is that interpreted? And have you had any problems with that section? And I believe that the policy does cover, like, there are very clear guidelines about what is non-negotiable, anything that promotes violence. So if you can address that, I would appreciate it.
Sure. When you think about the subjectivity in dress codes, it goes back to that, whatever's being left into the interpretation of whomever is the adjudicator in this particular case. So the goal was to take that away, and there's no one could mistake a marijuana leaf on a t-shirt or a beer commercial or tequila bottle. I mean, that is just as plain as day. No room for interpretation. Guns, weapons on T-shirts, sayings that are harmful to groups or subgroups, racist jargon or whatever. It's clear as day, so there, it takes the subjectivity out of it, and it helps us really be able to manage and assess true dress code violations when we see them.
Thank you, Keith. Are there any other questions?
I think Radea,
from
Radea had her hand up.
I did. Now there are piano lessons happening in the background. I'm sorry if that's interfering. That was the question actually that I had, and I'm not sure if there's somebody on the committee that knows. The impression I got from Dr. Jones at the LSC meeting was that punishments for dress code violations have not been a big thing, or have not been common. And I'm not sure if that was me, interpreting, but I guess that's one question. The big thing that I got from the incident was confusion, and anxiety, right? Because a lot of the students were confused, and then there's this question, as people have talked about, of subjectivity and sort of this being thrown out there, and like, so now what does that mean? And who are you talking? Are you talking about me? Who are you talking about? And so that I'm not sure that. I guess I'm wondering how much sort of the punishment piece has been an issue versus just addressing this question of confusion and giving the students guidelines that make sense to them and that don't make them that reduce anxiety and confusion.
I can speak to that. Where it's not just the kids being confused as to what to wear, it's the adults also is confused as far as how to address, and the courage to actually address what is stated in the school dress code. Some of the feedback that we got from our teachers was like, oh my God, thank God I don't have to have this conversation anymore. That's creepy. Me talking to this young lady about her short skirt or her spaghetti strap. Thank goodness I don't have to have this uncomfortable conversation with my student anymore. So again, it focuses on kind of what's internal and not what's external. It's taken away from, that whole notion of body shaming and objectifying these kids' bodies. And I know I've got to go. My daughter's like, Daddy, you have to take me to dance. But if I can just say finally, if there, as you move through this process and you're interested about some of the very technical details with which we endured and some of the challenges that we had along the way, I'm happy to go through with you. But I think there's one student on here, right?
I think she had to drop off. She had to
drop off. Well, I would just say the power is in the student voice. Listen to the students. Provide a space for students to bring to the table, to you, the leadership, the shot callers, the policymakers, to bring to you what the concerns are. You then can go back and ask for the data. You then can go back and do your qualitative and quantitative research to help inform the work. So again, I'm really happy to be here tonight. Roberto, thank you for the invitation. You guys, nice to see you. And again, feel free to invite me back anytime.
Keith, thank you so much. I really do appreciate you sharing space and building community and just extending your leadership to our district. And have a wonderful evening with your family.
Thank you so much, guys. Bye-bye.
And then Rachel, I also wanted to extend my gratitude to you for spending your evening with us and just sharing about students' rights and the laws that protect our students and making sure that they're able to freely express themselves and that we're creating this affirming space. So thank you so much, Rachel. I know it was like a a last minute notice. But I'm grateful to the ACLU. I'm grateful to Amari and yourself for spending your time with us.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure to be here tonight, and I'm just very sort of honored to be here and impressed with this very important work that you all are doing. I'm happy to serve as a resource moving forward, or sounding board, as you move forward in this very important process. And thank you for your work. Thank you for having me. Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Good night, Rachel. Enjoy your evening with your family.
Thank you.
So moving on to the next item, what I'd like to do now is allow, so at the last meeting, a few of our members reached out to, connected with other CPS schools and schools in our district. So I would like to have some of our members just share out, and then going back to what Laura mentioned earlier. So as we've been listening and learning, I think that Laura and I were talking about this. Laura, do you want to explain how we want to structure this a little bit as we're sharing out what we've learned?
Sure. What I'll do is I'm going to share a note catcher so you guys can see it in real time. And I gave everybody editing privileges. So if you know, to maximize our precious time, if you would rather just type it in there, the first section has basically name of committee member, what are some trends and patterns you're seeing, other notes, and just like what must we include. So as you're hearing this information, if something pops up and you want to put in the note catcher yourself, go ahead and do that. Otherwise, at the end of this conversation and sharing out, we're going to sort of reflect on all of the information that has been shared, so that we can really focus on like what are the trends and patterns that we're seeing overall, and what we want to do with Jones's dress code policy. Give me 1 second to put that in the chat. I also want to apologize to Jay why I did not include him earlier. He is here, or they are here. And I included him, or they, sorry, JY, in the minutes. Okay, I just put the reflection note catcher.
And before we start, so Dora was going to reach out to Whitney Young and Northside College Prep, but Dora is also in the middle of college application process. So she extends her, she just wanted to just say that she wasn't able to connect with those two schools and that she appreciates this committee taking on this work. So lots of shout outs to Dora, and I wish you and your family all the best as you get through this college application process, and hopefully we will see her at the next meeting.
Roberto, the dress codes from those schools are included in the Google Drive that Laura gave us.
Yes, they. I believe that is so. Unless you're telling me. If you're telling me, then it is true.
I had the opportunity to read them today. Yes, they're there. So those schools are represented, even though Dora can't be with us this evening.
Thank you, Deborah. So I will open up the space and see if anyone would like to share out what they've learned. And then we'll each, just as Laura mentioned, if there's certain things that you think should be part of the dress code or that we should consider, go ahead and put it in the note catcher. And if you don't want to volunteer, I'm just gonna randomly select people on this screen. Yes, Michael.
I'll volunteer to go first. Good evening, everybody. Nice to see you all for the first time since I wasn't able to make the first meeting. So I spoke with Lincoln Park High School about their dress code policy, or I should say dress code policy in development, because they're currently in the process of creating a dress code. And one of the first things that was relayed to me about their issues around dress code was that it really was an issue of attire deemed to be too revealing or indecent. In terms of other issues around, drug or alcohol references, stuff like that, they said like that really hasn't been an issue. That's been easier for them to deal with. What has really created issues is this kind of policing of revealing clothing or indecency. Surprisingly, what was relayed is that, because I asked this question specifically, they said there's been no issues with specific to marginalized groups or with at least accusations or documented instances of racial bias in the enforcement of any of issues around student attire. But where there perhaps is bias that's been recognized is related to body type, and students of certain body types being much more likely to be deemed to be dressed inappropriately relative to similarly dressed students with different body types. And then that's an area where they're currently trying to build kind of staff awareness of that bias in policing student attire. And one of the, before getting into some of the interesting things about how they're going about developing this dress code policy, I wanted to share one interesting statement that jumped out at me, which was that they're trying to move away from a posture of policing what kids wear to one of providing guidance. I think this kind of echoes some of what came up earlier tonight. I think, Roberto, what you had mentioned in terms of that guidance piece. And they specifically said they're trying to move away from a posture of policing what kids wear to one of providing guidance. And I think that's sort of, as I share kind of some of the things that they're doing in terms of how they're developing the policy and what their objectives are, I think that's really reflected. So one of the most important things they're doing is trying to incorporate student voice in this process, and they're working with an existing student group called True Alliance, which is a group focused on kind of general student well-being, focused on healthy choices, understanding consent, establishing and respecting boundaries. And I thought that was sort of, especially what I just relayed about their objectives, sort of an interesting choice and probably very intentional choice in terms of the student group that is being tasked with, along with some designated teacher leads, with developing this policy. They've also moved away from, I guess, what would have been sort of an ad hoc, in the moment teacher or support staff conducted enforcement of regulating student attire, to one where they have they've designated specific staff members to have private conversations with students, kind of pulling them aside regarding student attire. And that was in response to, I think, the concerns on both the teacher and the student. So similar to what Dr. Robinson had shared earlier, teachers just don't want to be doing this. It's uncomfortable for them. In many instances, teachers were also concerned that there had been instances, I guess, at least at Lincoln Park High School, where teachers who had tried to address an issue with student attire had been accused of harassment. So there was that fear that was related by Lincoln Park High School in terms of teacher concerns. And then in terms of the student experience, those in the moment sort of ad hoc ways of addressing things can often feel like public shaming, which is not productive, and definitely not just generally not a positive student experience. And interestingly, with this, another thing that was added in terms of this piece about designating specific staff members to address these things in private conversations was that they aimed to have the individuals conducting those conversations as much as possible match, in their words, the students' gender and or cultural lens, or would be able to approach whatever issue it was from the same gender and or cultural lens. Another interesting aspect of this is that they try to model these conversations on their general restorative practices conversations that they apply to other issues of student discipline, where the goal is to understand what's going on with the student, what led to that student's decisions, and trying to build the student's understanding of, was this a good or not good decision, and what the impact of their decisions are. I thought that piece was really interesting, that they try to make it very much a restorative, not necessarily a punitive or disciplinary interaction. And one last, so that's kind of, those were some of the key points in terms of how they're approaching this. One last point I would note about something that was shared from Lincoln Park High School is that they've expressed pretty strongly that they are seeking, or they would like to see, stronger and more concrete guidance from central office on issues of student attire and dress code. Specifically, 3 offices that were specifically called out that they'd like to see involved are the Office of Student Protection, the Office of Student Health and Wellness, and the Office of Social and Emotional Learning. And so as they're determining what their dress code policy is as a school, they really would like to see stronger guidance and more involvement from central office.
Thank you, Michael, for connecting with Lincoln Park High School. Appreciate you. Does anybody else, or would anybody else like to share out?
Raquel, I think you had your hand.
Yes. Wait, let me lower my hand before I forget. This is really important, but from the 2 presentations, 2 speakers, something has really taken my focus off of this, and that is like my kids and family, so I feel like it's equally important, and I don't know if this happens, with the sex health training, if there's also discussions in there about non-binary people and, like gay people that are queer, dressed in a queer, expressive manner with their clothing, so like my concern, because none of that was talked about, and I just feel like that's very concerning to me, people that identify as, or, queer expression, like their safety. And I don't know if training and of all of that, awareness and training of all of that is done to the students, or, presented to the students. So I just wanted to say that, because that is really, I can't even focus because I'm just so worried about that. I felt that the presentation needs to be updated, because it's not just, like women, it's like people that, like I said, the queer, expression. So, so it just needs to be more inclusive. The training that was presented, or the presentation. So now I'm going to get to the research I did on the schools. So I just thought that because I'm sorry, I'm like so I'm so distracted by the presentation. So it was, let me say that it was difficult. I personally did not find a school that was racially diverse as Jones. So I had to find 3 different schools that represented our 3 largest minorities at Jones. So that would be the Hispanic population, Asian population, and Black population. But I pretty much got the same thing from all of the schools. They do not have a dress code. What is written in the student handbook is to dress appropriately. But they do not allow, transparent clothing, swimsuits, regardless of gender, swimsuits are not allowed. Clothes that, undergarments worn as a top or bottom. So that's what I found at King College Prep, Juarez Community Academy, and Thomas Kelly College Prep.
Sorry, Rachel, or can you repeat that? King College?
Oh, the schools?
Yes, please.
Okay, sorry. So it's King College Prep High School, Juarez Community Academy,
okay,
and then Thomas Kelly College Prep.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for listening to me.
Thank you, Raquel. And Deborah.
So I reached out to Ogden International High School, and they are a very diverse school, large Black population, large Hispanic population, smaller white population. They have just done a revision to their dress code. So their high school dress code is different than when I was on the LSC at Ogden. And they decided that their student voice committee, which is very active there, would be responsible for drafting it. Administration said, we need something to enforce, but you all get to decide what it's going to look like. It's very interesting because it is very closely modeled on the Evanston Township High School dress code. And specifically, they do mention, to Raquel's point, that students ask that when being addressed for their appearance and the choices they've made on what to wear, adults be mindful of their own biases and prejudices, their assumptions of students, and consider the language used towards members of the LGBTQ+ community. So it's in the Ogden dress code specifically that they want an inclusive environment for everybody. And the first thing on there was free of inappropriate logos, slogans, phrases, or pictures. Nothing see-through. They took an approach of what is allowed. Tank tops, t-shirts, and button-up shirts are allowed. School bottoms include pants, including ripped jeans or leggings, skirts, shorts, skirts, dresses, or yoga pants, as long as the underwear and buttocks are covered. They used to have a no hat rule at Ogden, that you couldn't have a hood up or a hat rule, and they've changed that now. And in addition to religious headwear being allowed, they don't want hoods up in the hallway, but you can wear a hat as long as your face and your ears are visible. Basically, this is for safety and security purposes. They want to be able to identify who students are in the hallways, but in the classrooms, you can wear hoods and hats at will, and face of the students must be visible to the teachers, except for religious reasons. If you have someone who needs to have their face covered for religious reasons, they also have added, because of the pandemic, face masks are a requirement as long as the law is requiring it. Shoes must be worn, slippers and house shoes are not acceptable. And you can have earbuds and headphones in the hallway as long as you're mindful of your surroundings. So it's a single page, very much in the same ilk as the Evanston Township dress code, and really gives the students much broader self-expression than their old dress code, which didn't allow any kind of head coverings except for religious purposes. And wanting shoulders covered and skirt links and stuff like that. They did away with all of that. And so this is really very inclusive now, and it's universally enforceable for anyone at the school, not just, picking a particular gender type or something like that. So I think they did a nice job with their revision.
Thank you, Deborah. And then does anybody else would like to share out? Otherwise, I'm gonna pick a box.
I can go quickly. So I tried reaching out to Peyton, but they're like in between administration and it's been wild over there. But I haven't been able to find like the student code of conduct at all. I reached out to a couple parents that I know out there still. So if I get updates, you'll get updates. But JY and I actually work for the Noble Network of Charter Schools, which I often don't say out loud because there's a lot of feelings involved with that. But we have done a lot of changes within the last year specifically that are geared towards our anti-racist commitment that our CEO put in place last year. So Noble was definitely a network that followed these, like, you can't have unruly hair, like you couldn't have graphics, like you couldn't wear a non-black belt and students would get disciplined because of it. And it was very much anti-black. You couldn't have unnatural hair color. Like there were just like a lot of things wrong with our dress code policy and like appearance policy, I guess. So they revamped the whole thing. There is a section and they revamped it and our dress code looks different from like CPS. So students have to wear a branded top. It has to have the campus logo on it. But it can be like, sometimes parents get like a UICCP top and like students can wear that. So it says like UICCP parent. They can wear like their homeroom sweaters. Like they have to wear anything that has been like administered or given to them by the school on their top half. Bottom half just has to be khaki, black, or blue. And it says specifically in our dress code policy that there is no, I'm trying to find like the exact wording. There's no requirements as it comes to like length. They can wear jeans, like they can wear anything on top as long as they're like wearing bottoms. And then it also says, to Raquel's point, to ensure effective and equitable enforcement of this dress code, school staff shall uphold the dress code consistently and in a manner that does not reinforce or increase marginalization or oppression of any group based on race, sex, gender identity, gender expression, sexual orientation, ethnicity, religion, cultural observance, household income, or body type / size. So yeah, shirts have to be Noble branded, specifically campus branded, bottoms, anything, as long as it's unaltered. If it's a school one, it has to be unaltered. If not, then it doesn't matter. Shoes, students must wear shoes. Head coverings, students can't wear hats, hoods, or ski masks for safety reasons. And then something that is new also to our network is this included staff. We weren't allowed to show our tattoos. So I know y'all haven't seen me in person, but I have like full sleeves on both sides. We had to cover completely for like when I first started working there. But now as part of their self-expression role, as long as it's not like gang affiliated or anything, you can demonstrate your self-expression via your tattoos, and those can be visible, including piercings. Yeah, I don't know, JY, if you want to add anything. JY is our data analyst specialist, and the love of my life. They just
about data, actually, now that you bring that up. So yeah, like prior to making all of these changes, Noble did like some very extensive surveying of students who were still at Noble, of alumni, and of parents, families, and community. It was like a part of like a whole series of surveys we did over the last year. We got like thousands of responses because, you know, there are a lot of kids and families in the network. And we explicitly asked folks to, for their feedback on the dress code, like specific aspects of the dress code. Like, are there certain things that you would like to keep, like shirts, belt, pants, shoes, or things that you would like to change? So some very specific questions around that. So there was definitely a lot of community, family, and student input that was gathered up front before a lot of these changes were rolled out this school year. So that's like the main thing that I would add to what Violetta has already said.
And so yes, and that looked like town halls, like with parents at each campus. Parents were coming into town halls, students were coming in to town halls to specifically address the dress code at our campuses.
Thank you, Violetta and JY. Appreciate you. And then does anybody else would like to share out? So I'm gonna call someone out here, or like just ask, invite someone. That's a better phrase. Invite someone to share.
I can share if you.
Oh, perfect.
Need volunteers. I'm just trying to capture everybody's notes. I just need a second to find my overview, and then I'll share it in the link so that you guys can just follow along as I share out. So if someone wants to share while I do that, you can. Otherwise, I need a minute.
I can provide the link, Laura. Let me find the overview. I think this is it.
Okay, I just shared it. It's also in the folder. But just to give you guys a minute to, it's just a PDF, so it should take you there. Let me know if it doesn't work. I'll just walk you guys through. I reached out to 3 different, is it Radaya or Radaya? I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name. I'm messing up with everybody's name. I'm so sorry.
No, sorry, it's Radaya, but
Radaya. Okay.
please share out first. I'll come back to I just have a thought
Okay.
that I want to sort of put out there, but yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay, so there are 3 schools I researched, Lane Tech, Lindboom, and Kenwood Academy High School. Lane Tech, I spoke to the Dean of Students, Mr. Lopez, and ultimately he expressed that they're really not doing much with the dress code right now in terms of enforcing it, because they are just letting students express themselves within reason. There's a lot of things being raised right now with dress code, and they just are, they want to make sure that students are feeling comfortable. When we went through the series of questions that we gave to the committee, he's really unsure with how the dress code was developed because it happened before his time. But he did explain their process for addressing issues with the dress code. So one way they resolve it is in the dean's office. He focused on making sure the students have an opportunity to fix their uniform infractions, so that they can they have PE uniforms in the office so that they don't miss instructional time. So it happens in the dean's office. And really, he said that who becomes involved depends on comfort. And I think this does speak to what Raquel raised. He did specify it's female student with female teacher and male student, but didn't really speak to many of the LGBT students or anything like that, or non-binary students. So that's something for us to consider, but that's just a few examples he had given. Also, he said that some security officers help to resolve problems with dress code. That's not just handled with the teachers or the dean's office, but security team also helps with it. And it's mainly communicated in their handbook. Sometimes their PE or health classes help to disseminate that information. And they do have a culture and climate team with the student component. So they incorporate that student voice. There's 2 students per each grade. There's a total of 20 members, and they have conversations to give and get feedback on student policies like the dress code. His overall feedback was to encourage us to really have good dialogue with the student leaders, and getting the students to have a hand in communicating and engaging conversations about the dress code, and leading that freedom of expression is great, but doing it in a way that's uplifting and makes everyone included and comfortable. At Lindblom, Mr. Williams was unavailable. He was the dean of students, but I have links to all the dress code policies, and it's also in the folder, but I just pulled a few things. They have an overall message at the beginning, Lindblom believes that the dress code should support equitable education access and should not reinforce gender stereotypes. The student dress code and administrative enforcement should not reinforce or increase marginalization or oppression of any group based on race, gender, ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation, household income, gender equality, or cultural observance. And they do have a very structured, sort of like the Evanston layout and the now Oregon layout, where there's guiding principles. Students must wear clothes, students may wear, students cannot wear sections, so that's sort of laid out explicitly. And finally, at Kenwood, Mr. Gill, also the dean of students there, stated that they're in the process of redeveloping and revamping their dress code. So the link there is only just to the CPS guidance on dress code / uniform. They don't have anything specific to their dress code right now, but he did speak to me about the fact that they're what they're doing right now and some of the things that they may focus on. And he said it stemmed from reaching out to students, parents, and faculty and asking them, how do you change your environment to be more supportive and helpful? So they gather data anecdotally first to get their opinion. And part of this discussion was about how to cross gender barriers, get away from boys having to dress like boys, that makes the students feel uncomfortable, and they feel like that needs to be raised and that needs to be addressed. It seems like that could be a trend that we're noticing here. Their overall focus is to make the school community feel safe. And when it comes to reinforcing the dress code, they don't believe in severe discipline for dress code. And those are just a list of some examples they're considering, but basically prohibiting dress shirts or any clothing that's disrespectful to the community. I think they're being explicit about it, but just overall, what does that mean? Making a rule about the length of dresses and skirts. They are wanting to make sure that they have a dress code that doesn't restrict students from education. Addressing how faculty should speak to the students, reflecting on how the dress code should not discriminate on body types. They want to have a description on how to wear hats so it doesn't depict gang involvement, not including clothing that is affiliated with drugs or anything illegal, a protocol to notify parents, and ways for the students to fix, like giving them a different item to wear, and then considering something about not wearing clothing that shows like undergarments, nightwear, or pajamas. And his ultimate overall recommendation was to not rate anything that could be used to discriminate against students and to be more specific.
Thank you, Laura, for sharing out. And then I think Gladys, I know you reached out to me and I had asked you, I had invited you if you wanted to help out with reaching out to a couple schools. Wanted to see if you had if you were able to connect with the two schools, Hancock College Prep and was it Curie High School?
Yes, it was Curie, but I believe there was somebody before me with their hand raised.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, I think that was me again. Please continue. Thank you.
So I just started my research this week. I did get connected with the AP at Hancock, so we're emailing back and forth about the questions. And I have a meeting tomorrow with the Dean of Students for Curie as well. But I did want to make some suggestions. The biggest issue that I've had with dress policy myself has always been, and I asked this question to the presenter earlier, is about what is considered professional. So I believe that what is considered professional can also be stifling for students and adults. So Violetta had mentioned about how Noble had changed their policies now to like let adults show tattoos, have piercings. And so then I, like, just from experience is why I'm bringing this up. During the pandemic, I couldn't dye my hair, but for the past 20 years, I've had pink hair. I've gone to all my job interviews with pink hair, got my last two with my pink hair. I have visible tattoos. You can see I have a piercing. And to think about like abiding by what the students are being told to dress as what is considered professional, if I myself had to do that, I would be miserable at work. So I really like that, having that freedom of expression at work as an individual. I've worn jeans and for the past 10 years every day to work. And so then I think that it should also be equal to the students. If we're allowing for professionals to have piercings, visible tattoos, don't have to have like a suit and tie every day, then I think that that should also be included in what is considered professional for the students when they do have to dress up. So that's kind of my like 2 cents for that.
Thank you, Gladys, and I'm looking forward to seeing what additional information and insights you get from the AP at Hancock College Prep and the Dean at Curie. And I really do appreciate you reaching out to them and sharing out your perspective on the term professional, right? And what that might mean, and that it could potentially be, depending on the person, the definition could be potentially harmful to individuals in our community. And I think that rounds out the folks who are connecting with various schools. And I think we had, are there any comments or questions from members of the committee? I think you're on mute.
Okay, sorry about that. So yes, I guess the question / comment. One thing I want us to explicitly address is sort of what the purpose of a dress code is, right? So we've talked a bit about professionalism, and people talked about dress for success, or there's appropriateness, safety. You know, there are some different pieces coming in here, and that maybe in and whatever we propose, whatever the committee comes up with, that should be part of the language. You know, it helps, I think, explain why the decisions are there, and I think someone else, maybe, I can't remember now, I'm sorry, who earlier, that framing it as guidance rather than thinking about it as, you know, something to kind of catch kids on or to punish them for, which also hopefully would help them, you know, be on board with it, right? Like they're to not feel like it's something that they need to push against or find a way around, but that there are hopefully, you know, that there are good reasons or thoughtful reasons, and it's not just a random set of rules or, yeah, sorry. So and I also wanted to comment on Gladys, when the professionalism comment, I think, is right on, and that there is this, what's considered professional has changed considerably over the past however long we want to go back, and varies, of course, from profession to profession. But even if that is the goal, that thinking broadly about what that actually means. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. And I think for me, like, the goal is to provide guidance, right? And so that when our administrators, the Jones Administrative Leadership Team, is thinking about, you know, who is dressed appropriately versus inappropriately, right? We have to be clear with our students. We have to be clear with providing them with guidance and not just making sort of vague statements about, like, use common sense, or that, you know, you should follow the Jones grad values, right? I think there are certain concrete things that we can say are non-negotiable, and that we want our students to freely express themselves in the way that they feel comfortable. And I think that's important, right? And we don't want them to feel that they are always being scrutinized because the way they look, because they're the way that they are dressed, or because they're expressing themselves that may not conform to society. So I think that's the goal that that's the lens that I'm looking at from. And I think that early on in the school year, for Dr. Powers and the administrative leadership team to start addressing the dress code after coming back, after still being in a pandemic, and then coming back to school in person, I think it just sets the wrong tone early on. And so I think that's the concerns that students have raised, and that's what we want to try to address by gathering this information from various stakeholders and thought partners. And then I see Olivia Guerrero, your hand is up.
I think Violeta had her hand up before I did.
I was actually gonna ask Ms. Guerrero for, like, her perspective as an educator, just because I know that the dress code, when it changed for us, and like when a lot of the demerit systems changed for us, like, it was a huge sigh of relief, because we didn't feel like students could accurately express themselves in our school buildings, and we also were stifled by it. So I was just, like, curious on the teacher perspective, because we've heard, like, the students a little bit at least, and then, like, the actual written stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as, like, a lot of you guys were, like, sharing out, you know, I was almost thinking, like, I understand, like, there's this need to get more specific, obviously, because ours is, like, so vague, but I think it's so vague because we don't actually, like, use it or enforce it, which is kind of how we're in this problem now. But even as you were talking about, like, you, Violeta, as, like, even the teachers, like, I have visible tattoos, I wear jeans every day, I have piercings, and some of the kids do too. So I don't think that, or even some of the things, like, we're concerned, because I was like, oh, if we start, like, monitoring or policing for that, like, we're going down this rabbit hole. I think my understanding of, like, those announcements stemmed from mostly, like, students wearing basically undergarments as clothes. So I don't think that at Jones, like the real issue is like tattoos or piercings or clothes with gang affiliation, because those aren't the issues that I'm seeing. And I think that there's a reluctance to like name exactly that, like we're naming students wearing undergarments as clothes for the reasons that I think one of the presenters talked about, were like, I am not ready to engage in that conversation to stop somebody, and then also like there is no clear rules about that, so I'm not going to like start a that conversation. And also it's just an uncomfortable conversation for me as a teacher to be having that conversation with a student, and I don't really necessarily see that as like my role. So I think like it's not about like hair color. Like even as a student, I remember wearing slippers to school for whatever reason. So it's not like we've been like very, strict in terms of clothing. I think it was from the pandemic, the kids were excited to like see each other. Yes, it was also hot. So there was a lot of, undergarments as clothing, which I think is really at the core of why we're having this conversation.
Thank you, Olivia, for sharing out your perspective as a teacher in the school, and then, caring for our kids and empowering them. Are there any other comments? Not. Here's what I would like to propose. So Laura created the note catcher. I've contributed to some. And what I think I'd like to do next steps is reach out to a few of you. We'll wait for Gladys to provide her information from Hancock, John Hancock College Prep and Curie High School, and then reach out to a few of you to work on drafting a statement and then presenting it to this committee next month, and then voting on that. We can discuss whether we want to include certain things, include or exclude things, and then from there. We'll use the next meeting to hammer out and finalize a draft. And then the next step is to share that draft with the Jones LSC Health and Safety Committee. We're expected to collaborate with them. So we will take the first initial draft and then share it over to them. And then they will review it, make any sort of edits or changes, additions, and then they will present it to the Jones LSC for approval. So I think that's the process at this point. So that's what I like to do. And if everybody's okay with that, I think a few people can work on that draft based on all the resources that are available in the shared drive, based on the presentation, based on the comments that we've made today from various individuals. And then we can, draft something. Yes, Laura.
Can I just add on, we don't have to have a conversation right now because I know it's been a while. This meeting edit is going long. But if there wasn't something that you I know that people wrote in the note catcher, but if there's something that you really want to make sure is included, whether it's like something that stood out, trends and pattern, or something that is an overall goal or must have the dress code, if you can just fill that note catcher out, that way whoever works on it knows and is inclusive of all the voices from this committee. And I think another next step is important that we do include that student voice and get that data. So I'm not sure if we need to talk to AP Mitchell, or I don't know if Olivia can gather that data for us to, I don't know if you have access to like just pull a report for student infraction, so we know where the dress codes, like if we could look at, I don't know if the staff has any access to it, but maybe probably AP Mitchell, but someone from the school that can give us that information, or give that committee or whoever is working on the draft that information, so that can also inform the policy writing.
And I do want to add just a couple of notes. So we do have two student representatives, Debbie and Daniel. So once we draft something, we can ask them to review it and to share it out with the various cultural identity clubs and the Student Government Association to see what their thoughts are on that. And they were supposed to be, I think one of their assignments was to gather feedback and share it out with us. And I think they're still doing that. And then the last thing I want to mention, one thing that really stood out that was part of the National Organization for Women's model student dress code that Evanston Township High School adopted was just uplifting, right? Uplifting student voice. And one of the things that really stood out is this paragraph here that talks about student dress code should support equitable educational access and should not reinforce gender stereotypes, and that student dress code and the administrative enforcement should not reinforce or increase marginalization. And there were a few schools, I think two or three CPS schools that adopted some sort of similar language. So I think it's important to uplift our students. And then Shannon, I see you have your hand up.
Thanks. I just had a question because I just heard about this meeting today, so I don't really know what you've already done. But it seems, I'm just wondering if there has been any like polling or surveying of students. I think it was Violetta who said her school did a lot of that with parents. I just so I don't know if I've missed things previous to this, since you're talking about drafting something already, and I'm wondering how much information already, how much information you all already have. And another thing is, this is just a technical thing. I don't know how to see the note catcher. So I don't know if you guys are able to see it right now, but I can't. So
So Shannon, I can answer the first part. Is we have received, a few students have, or at least a couple students attended the LSC meeting in September, and they voiced their concerns. And then they also provided a statement, and that was submitted to the local school council. And then Daniel, who's the student representative on the local school council, also presented some information about what students were feeling when Dr. Powers made the several announcements about the dress code. And last month at the Equity Committee, Debbie and Daniel, Debbie is the student representative for the Equity Committee, and Daniel are working on collecting student feedback. So we're still waiting on that information. And then all of our members last week or last month, I had asked them if they could kindly reach out to several schools so we can see what other schools' policies are and try to build on that, taking elements from those schools.
thank you. Okay, thanks.
Shannon, I just included the link to the note catcher again. And it's in the chats. Are you able to see the chat?
Yeah, yes, thank you. Thanks.
And Kathy, you have your hand up.
Let me lower that hand. I briefly talked to an Evanston mom today who, especially like her daughter, was really instrumental in making change in Evanston. And I think one interesting thing about it that I didn't really realize, that it really started at the middle school level there. And students were really unhappy with the policies in middle school. And they pushed for District 65 to change that policy. And then, having made that change as sort of, preteens, they went on to high school. And then that was really what spurred the movement at high school to change the high school level policy. And it was really very student driven there. And the mom also said that having had that policy in place there, it's very, it's been very uncontroversial ever since. And I think it's been a pretty smooth existence there. So it's definitely worth it to hear from some of the students who, are existing under that policy. And it looks like Lindblom's is very similar and draws on ETHS too. So I think it would be great to hear from students from either of those. And then one thing to keep in mind, I think, for the LSC is that we are supposed to have an election by November 15th to select our 2 new student members. So there'll be 3 members, 2 joining Daniel Andrade. And so it's probably something that would be good to have them on the LSC when we hold a vote on this, I think. We should have those seats filled, and it's a very, it should be student driven. So, so just wanted to share those things with you guys.
Thank you, Kathy. So I'm trying to keep our meetings 90 minutes, and I know we've gone over 30 minutes, but we've had two wonderful presentations, and there was just a lot to share out. So I see like 3 hands up, and I don't know if they're old hands, new hands. I'm gonna just call out on the first box I see. Laura.
I think the other two may have been before me, but I just wanted to quickly say that I unfortunately will not be in the LSC for that much longer because I am moving to Andersonville. So I wanted to give you guys a heads up. I'm growing my family. I'm pregnant, expecting. So we are growing into a different location. And so I'm happy to help as much as I can until we make the move. We're likely, thank you, to move by the end of the year. But I just want to make sure you're all aware of that. But I'm still very invested in helping with equity, like making all schools and all environments as equitable as possible, near and far. So I'm very, I'm very appreciative of the time that I've had with you guys. And I'm very open to still continue to help in any way I can, as much as I can, while we're making this move.
Congratulations, Laura, and you've been just a wonderful person to be part of this committee. So I really do appreciate you. And then I'm going to go down the box. Radaya.
So I wanted to make one more comment, that I noticed that several of the schools had that same line that's in Jones. Jones policy doesn't say much. The main thing is the final decision or final authority rests with the administration. And I remember, I think that Daniel commented that was the part that was kind of the most, that really kind of stuck in their craw or whatever for the kids. That was to have it be vague, but then also have that line about the final authority. And I noticed that was in several of the other policies as well. So I guess it just sort of highlighting that, and that whether that's something that would be considered being changed, or it's just maybe it's about how it's framed. Some of the other policies, I can't remember exactly who, maybe Kelly's, it had that line, but somehow leading up to it, it didn't read the same, like it didn't have the same disconnect. So maybe it's just even about sort of the phrasing, but Cassie's comments about having student, just making sure we have the student point of view coming in, reminded me of Daniel mentioning that, and that I also, when I read the policy, was sort of struck by that, in the disparity there. Sort of, we want you to do what you think is best, but meanwhile, if we think it's bad, so just wanted to highlight that.
And thank you for highlighting that, and that is correct. Daniel did point that out, that it seemed there was like a disconnect there. And then, are there any other comments before we adjourn? Laura, is that an old hand?
Yes, I'm sorry, I didn't take it off.
Thank you. So thank you all so much for spending time with us and sharing space. I really do appreciate your time and your commitment and just empowering our students and uplifting their voice. So thank you. And if there are no other comments, going once, going twice, thank you so much. Enjoy your evening with your families.